Welcome to one of the many tutorials on some of the strategies to try and break the stalemate in World War One. Today we're going to look at the idea of going over the top, it was called. Obviously the reason for that was you spent most of your time down in the trenches here, and then you would go over the top of the barbed wire, etc. The basic idea of going over the top was to try and reach the other people's trench, to take the trench, and to keep going. Okay, the overall thing they wanted to do was achieve a breakout, to get out of these trenches and to get past their initial line of trenches and to go kind of throughout past enemy lines. That was the main objective. Hopefully I've shown that pretty clearly here. So there's no man's land, and the idea was to go over the top, to not just get past the trench, but then once you've achieved maybe a breakout here, they would spread out and take the rest of the trench. So these arrows showing it would actually be across a long section that this kind of attack would happen. That was usually at the start of the war. That's what they did. They tried to make it as long as possible to try and make sure that one was successful. So what usually would start the attack going over the top was an artillery barrage. The idea of it, and these artillery would be way back that way, not here, but for the concept I've put it there. They would fire, and the main point of them firing was to break up the barbed wire that was there to allow the men to get through, and also to stop resistance, kill machine gunners, etc, etc, etc. So for the purposes of the attack, an artillery barrage always preceded it, and it was quite clear after a little while that as soon as the artillery stopped firing, if anyone was left alive in the trenches, which they often were, they would know an attack was occurring. But what was supposed to happen? Artillery was supposed to break up the barbed wire so that people would get through. The defenders were supposed to be killed or unable to continue fighting. And these guys over here would start their march. They'd hop out and they'd have sections of the barbed wire cut so they could get out, and they would hop out and they would begin walking through no man's land. Here's where they were at their most vulnerable, and usually if the artillery barrage wasn't successful enough, then here's where the machine gun would make the most impact. These soldiers would not have just their gun and some ammo. They were usually packed up with a whole heap of things in case they were successful. So they would have extra supplies, extra ammunition, really heavy stuff. Some guy would have on his back this big kind of rolling ladder type equipment that would be used to go over barbed wire, so these guys are able to get over it. It wasn't always successful. Quite a few people got caught in barbed wire and were killed, but yeah, this guy would be just weighed down. There was no real way you could run or have any kind of agility carrying all the stuff that they were carrying. So unless the artillery did its job, these guys are kind of sitting ducks. So going over the top, as you can imagine, so it was a high risk strategy that often just completely failed.